I was actually sitting at a dinner before a reconciliation service with a bunch of priests. And this email comes through, and I just remember that the room got incredibly silent. There were some tears starting to fall. We just could not believe that something like this could actually happen.
I think I was at first just confused and really in unbelief.
When the appearance of the coronavirus or COVID began, it was a time of wild uncertainty in the sense of where this was going to go, and it must have been early to mid-March before it really got hitting where we were at.
To tell the people to their faces and look at them and say, we will not be having Mass next week, it defeated me. I could barely make out the words.
As we entered into it and we were coming to the realization that this was going to extend itself a little bit longer, there was a lot of grief going on inside of me.
Now, you do private masses when you're a priest, and that's fine, and there's the community of saints. But it's very much a relational matter, so you really miss people being there.
What I felt from the people of God at the beginning of that pandemic was just a loss of words and a loss of understanding. Like, how do I continue an active relationship with God if I'm not participating in the sacraments? And so when that suddenly cut off, we feel that right here. And so everyone's reaction to that was very different. From apathy, people who are just like, okay, whatever, this doesn't really matter, to real anger and hurt, saying, you cannot keep me out of this Mass. You cannot tell me that I can't go to Mass. There was a deep sadness. There was just a sense of loss, that kind of sense of abandonment.
They felt disconnected. They felt lonely. And that's because church was a primary way of relating to others, very central in their lives.
During the pandemic, the church, we've gone through an incredible amount of different protocols and changes in how we do things, just trying to respond to how do we serve the people of God during a global pandemic.
In order to explain my response to the pandemic and to all the feelings of anger, loneliness, frustration that were going on through my congregation, I'm going to use a phrase from Pope Francis's letter on St. Joseph, on this year of St. Joseph. He says he was a man who responded with creative courage. How basically to turn a difficult situation into a possibility for growth.
Through the pandemic, what I saw in an amazing way was each church's willingness and ability to adapt to serving people who are at home, and what a difference that makes. Suddenly, the person sitting at home, now they are tuning into their priest in their church, looking at the tabernacle and the cross that they are familiar with walking into every Sunday. That sense of community was allowed to be felt even in your home because you were in your home parish.
And we were all thinking, how can we grow from this experience? And so immediately we thought, well, here's a great opportunity for us to really take the message and put it online.
It was intensely a time of acceleration because that wasn't something we were necessarily doing at the time. So advancing that gave an opportunity to continue to preach, continue to reflect, and knowing that at least you're proposing the love of God and it's out there.
I think pretty much everybody in the diocese, whoever didn't do that, did parking lot masses, which was also, talk about a way of being creatively courageous, right? I know priest friends of mine who did that, and they did amazing. People hearing confessions through drive-through. There's a priest friend of mine, Father Patrick Friend, who did that at Catholic High.
The one that really hurt and was really difficult to respond to was anointing of the sick. Many dioceses responded by specifying certain priests that were able to go to visit COVID patients. I know that there were certain priests here in the Diocese of Little Rock that were designated to go to the hospitals and go to the nursing homes to do that.
And I think at the beginning there was a lot of excitement around that, because here's priest mean, nothing gets the adrenaline going more than you realizing I'm being a creatively courageous father, right? I would say today. So we were all excited. But I have to say that it wasn't too long after I started doing masses online. It was just the realization that having mass online could never be like having mass with my family.
Obviously, the Eucharist is central, and it's an important part of us coming in living contact with the Lord. And it can create a longing by being apart for a little bit. So there's a certain sense of that pruning back that the Lord can make us all the more think about His living presence, which has been lost a little bit in the society that we're in, unfortunately, in the current times.
And I think we experience that spiritually. If I was hungry for God, if I was starving for communion with Him and on fire for the Lord, that fire was ignited the moment when we heard, I can't receive Him this Sunday.
So whenever we came slowly to be able to have masses together again, from a fatherly instinct, and I said, well, if we're going to come together, we're going to make sure everything's safe. And I went all out. I mean, I labeled the pews. We sought for ways to make sure that everything was labeled on the floor, the sacristy, and everything was basically going to be safe for people. I wanted people to be able to come back.
You can immediately see when you step into a church is people are wearing masks. People are socially distant. We actually roped off half of the church, so every other pew you could not enter. There was no public singing. There was a lot of hand sanitizer being used during the Mass.
One of the great fruits that immediately happened during COVID was a deep sense of solidarity and a thinking about the common good, very important matters in the social teaching of the church. That we're all thinking about one another, our health, and how we could still be together and do that responsibly. And so it gave us a sense of being together in this particular time, and a certain sense of obedience. And obedience really means just to listen, and to listen to our bishop and one another as we go forward.
My heart went out to the bishop because everything he was delineating for us to do and everything he was asking for us to do, it really was coming out of a fatherly heart. I would say if there's anybody who is creatively courageous throughout all this time, it's Bishop Anthony Taylor. He's a good man. He's a great man. He's a true father.
Well, as the process went on, it was obviously very difficult in the beginning. There was a certain desert experience that went on. But you don't go out to the desert just to experience the sacrificial parts of that. But it also removes you from things with which get in the way of hearing the voice of God. And we could do that in that certain Lenten experience. And hopefully that's something that's happened in COVID. Although it's difficult, you're not looking to do that. You just embrace that. It's all part of the cross.
We have understood what it means to suffer. Suffering from not being in community to being in person, whether it be suffering from wearing a mask and being socially distant from people, or the much deeper loss of losing a loved one or having your loved one being sick. We have entered the Passion with Christ during this pandemic. Overwhelmingly, though, I have felt that God provides. He has touched our hearts and helped us to yearn for the Eucharist, to yearn for community. He has provided the grace to overcome this mountain and the suffering that we face.
This pandemic has allowed us to rediscover our faith. And I hope that moving on from this time, we can look back and savor the ways in which we rediscovered that faith anew. Savor it, truly, and say, I remember how we got together and prayed. I remembered how I, as a father, took the initiative to say the blessing before meal. I remember how I, as a mother, built a little altar on the corner of my living room, and we would all watch Mass together. And I remember how intentional we had to be about that. I remember how we found a way to rediscover what it is that really drives us to Mass every Sunday. let's go to that, to the heart of that domestic church, and then let's bring that to Mass every Sunday. And then our churches can be set on fire, really, because people are living their faith at home, because moms and dads are really being the spiritual leaders in their homes, because we have learned to not take our faith for granted.